am Steven. I go to Columbia. I'm a second year at Columbia, incoming third year, and I study financial economics and applied statistics. I'll be leading the event today, and I am a 2023 Wonton Food Scholar. And thank you guys for taking the time to both come out to listen to our panelists and for the panelists coming to share their insights as well. I'm going to introduce our two panelists today. We have first Angelina. She is a 2021 Merit Scholar. She graduated MIT with a Bachelor's of Science and Master's in Engineering in both electrical engineering and computer science. She currently works as a quantitative researcher at Millennium. And our second panelist is Maylin. She is a 2017 Wonton Food Scholar, a graduate of Dartmouth College, majoring in economics and anthropology. She has worked in consulting, but now has jumped over to private equity. And so I'm going to turn it over to Angelina and Maylin. Go ahead, guys, take the floor.
I actually was working at Millennium back until March of this year, and then I actually switched firms to Agari Capital. It's one of Millennium's spin-offs, so still in the same business of trading commodities and specifically US natural gas.
Yeah, I think Stephen covered it well for me. I did management consulting for 2 years at LEK before switching over to the buy side at AEA, which is a private equity firm. Been here for almost 2 years now. So
Okay, wonderful. And so, yeah, thank you too for being here today. I know you guys have very busy schedules, so I appreciate you guys taking the time. Just a brief run a show for today. We're gonna spend the first 30 minutes or so kind of just asking pre-written questions that we asked you all to submit to Angelina and Maylin, and then the last 15 minutes or so will just be opening the floor to all you guys. You guys can ask any questions you want regarding the internship process, the recruiting process. And the first question is asking both panelists to trace their key milestones, whether that be like from your first finance class or your first internship to your current role, and highlighting all like the kind of major milestones along the way and like any pivotal decisions you've made. And so I guess Maylin, do you want to start on that one?
yeah, sure. I would say probably go back to college. My junior winter, I did an internship, a consulting internship with a boutique in Boston, at that time known as Altman Laundry, now Altman Solon. And I think that that was probably my first step into consulting. Also did a pivot into tech, did a junior summer internship at Amazon Web Services in their sales and marketing team, just because I've always been interested in tech, still kind of am, to get a flavor of that. Ultimately decided that consult a better area to start off my career, just in terms of the amount of going to learn in a short amount of time and the exposure to a wider variety of industries. So senior year, recruited for consulting, landed at LEK, and spent my first 2 years at LEK. LEK has a pretty strong focus in helping private equity clients do their due diligences when clients are considering to either buy or sell a new company. And that's probably where I got my biggest exposure to PE and decided that, oh, this is like pretty interesting. And I at the end of every project, I would always wonder like, oh, what did my client do after that? Did they actually buy the company? How long did they hold the company for? What did they do after they acquired them? So that eventually kind of sparked my interest to recruit for private equity, and that led me to.
Oh, yeah, so I can take it from there. So actually, before going into college, I wanted to do pre-med. Freshman year, I realized I didn't really want to go through that much more additional schooling. So I went down the path of CS. I actually didn't really take any finance classes. My first step into like something remotely finance related was doing like research at the MIT Sloan School of Management. So I was doing that throughout like all my years in college, and kind of like understood a lot of like the technical abilities or like the stuff that you see on the job that I still use daily basis. And my first internship was at AQR. That's a hedge fund based in Connecticut. So that was kind of like my first exposure into finance. And then from there, I did two other internships. One was at IMC, I was a quant trader. And then another one was another prop trading shop in Chicago. That was like only for 1 week though, sort of like an exploratory program for interns. And from there, I joined Millennium doing quant research. I was actually based out of Puerto Rico, so it wasn't really the path I was looking towards going to. Like I was definitely more towards like equities, but instead ended up pivoting to commodities because Puerto Rico was presenting a chance where we were building out a new team there, and I wanted to be one of like the new players and building out like a lot of modeling. And that turned into joining one of Millennium spinoffs, which I'm currently at, still trading commodities, specifically US natural gas. But yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. So definitely a wealth of experience and knowledge stretched across the both of you. Really appreciate that. I think the next question will is better suited for Malin because I was like Angelina in the sense that like I came into college as a pre-med before pivoting to finance. Um, and so the next question is like why you ultimately decided to pursue finance in your respective roles. I think Angelina, you can also answer this question as well. But just like what led you to pursue quant, whether it's consulting or private equity? Why finance? Why not why not pre-med? Why not law? Why not tech ultimately?
Yeah, I could go first. I think I've always been interested in business, so I like this probably stems back to high school. I went to Brooklyn Tech for high school where we had a major system, and I majored in finance. Took AP macro microeconomics, and I was like, oh, econ is where I want to be. I think the first time I learned about opportunity costs like blew my mind. It was like pretty nerdy, but just found it to be like very fascinating of a concept. So heading into college, I knew that I wanted to major in economics. I wanted to do something business related. I think in college, um, I was essentially kind of deciding between consulting versus banking versus kind of doing like corporate strategy and going into a big company. And I think of the three, I enjoy strategy the most. I enjoy like thinking through problems, thinking through growth. How does a company bring something into the market? How do they gain customers? How do they establish brand reputation? And I think that kind of took out banking for me and then left me with consulting or corp strat. I felt like it was too early for me to decide on industry that I wanted to dive into deeply. Consulting gave me a more exposure to a wider variety of industries. It also allowed me to get access to more senior management at a much younger age. If I went into corporate strategy, I probably wouldn't be talking to the CEO in like the next 10 to 15 years, but in consulting, your client is the CEO or CEO of the company. So you're really able to work with your management straight on. And I think the learning curve appeal kind of felt more attractive to me to like be able to do all that in a short amount of time right after college was very attractive of feature. So ultimately, I think that made me go with consulting as a career choice. And then even for the pivot to PE, I wouldn't say it was like pivot into finance. I think I was still continue like the drive for me was still the intellectual stimulation, curiosity of how made things flow, what created value, and I think that ultimately made me do the transition from consulting to PE.
Well, from my end, I guess I sort of touched on my pivot from like pre-med, but in terms of why I got into finance specifically, I think at MIT, finance has a pretty decent presence, particularly like quant finance. So it was sort of just like, why not? I'll like try it out and see if I like it. And I think what I appreciate about it is that like one, hierarchy is basically non-existent, especially at the firm like Millennium when I first started in Puerto Rico. You're working directly with the senior portfolio managers, and having that level of like seniority, sort of like mentoring was like definitely one of the pros. And then the second thing is sort of like the fast turnaround in terms of like whether you know like what you're modeling is like correct or not. Like the market will immediately price in and tell you that you're like right or wrong. And that fast iteration process was something I appreciated because it sort of gave you like a right answer and also like something that you're constantly iterating towards and trying to get better at.
Yeah, amazing. So definitely like very distinct reasons on why everyone decided to pursue finance. But I think going into more specific questions now, like go with respects to like I think from a perspective of like students going through internship recruiting right now, what was like the single toughest hurdle that you had to face when it comes to like landing a position like that? And like how did you navigate that hurdle?
I can probably take this question first then. I would say the hardest part, honestly, is just getting through all the interviews because a lot of these quant finance firms, they definitely do have pretty structured internships where, like, say you're in your junior year or something and you're like applying to these there's like a bunch of students from like pretty prestigious universities. It doesn't have to be target schools, but with some sort of like technical ability in terms of like math or like coding. And there's just like a large number of students who are like trying to apply for the same roles. And obviously, it's just through the process of selection that like some you will get offers from, others you won't. And I think for me, it was just like trying to like get through each round because it's going to be multiple rounds. Each one is sort of testing different technical abilities or like even like behavioral skills as well. I would say that like referrals are kind of important, but in the meantime, like I think for quant finance in particular, it's sort of like do you have the technical abilities to get through interviews and less so about like the networking. Obviously, that part does help so that you actually kind of have a sense of like what the job is going to be like on a day-to-day basis before you actually apply for those roles. But I would say it probably plays less of a factor, and it's more so just like practicing for the interviews to pass the questions.
Yeah, I would agree with what everything Angelina just said. Trusting the process is often easier said than done. But it really like you are it's very competitive, especially for internships because there's much fewer internship spots than full-time spots. So you have the same amount, if not an even greater talented pool of students fighting for very few spots for internships. And sometimes like it's not that you're not competent, it's just that it's too competitive. And I think being able to not feel like it's the end of the world or that you will be okay and you'll land somewhere as long as you keep pushing it, like this is what you want. And it does get a little bit, you do feel a little bit of pressure when the entire campus is like, or everybody around you are recruiting for the same jobs and like only going to offer so many positions to be okay and calm throughout that process is probably most important to be ready for the next round. Like, you're going to be applying to a number of companies at once. Like, don't let, however, like you performed well in the last interview. That's awesome. But that, don't let that like make you become suddenly overly confident in your next interview. And then vice versa. Horribly in the last interview. Don't let that impact.
And like at the end of the day, you sort of just need one internship. So like there's definitely going to be one out there that is going to be suited towards your needs in terms of like the career trajectory that you want to go towards.
Yep.
Yeah, and definitely like oh Megan, did you want to say something before I cut you off?
No, I agree with that.
But yeah, definitely like to that point of like applying to a bunch of internships, and like not getting bogged down. I think we'll touch upon later like how to stand out. I think a lot of people's questions was like how do you stand out in an interview? How do you stand out in the application process? So let's like dive into that. Like generally, what is your advice when it comes to standing out from the pack, when it comes to other applications, when it comes to interviews, when it comes to like small things you can do to kind of stand out from the pack?
I think doing your research ahead of time is helpful. I would say the industries that we're talking about are full of workaholics that are working all the time and they don't they might not have the patience. They would love to learn about you, but they not might not have to walk very basic questions. Or if you ask questions that make them feel like you have done your homework, it might not give them it might not vibe with them the right way because it's like, oh, if this is the answer that you easily gone on the website and learned in like 30 seconds, then it might not be a question that they should be spending their time on, I would say. And I think it's quite easy to tell. I would also say, as much as you want to spread your net wide when you're applying for internships, make sure that companies that you're like genuinely interested in. And when you walk into that interview, make sure you like know that is the company that you are like trying your best to get an interview position for. I think everybody wants to be proud of where they're working at. So even if the interview that you're going is not your ideal choice at that point in time where you're interviewing, that should be your ideal choice, and you should be trying to like show that this is you're genuinely interested. You've done your homework here because you want the job. And I think as the interviewer, seeing that passion and seeing that interest will go a long way. And under the consideration that solid and you perform just as well as everybody else, then I think it comes down to like your interest and respect level for the job.
I echo everything that was said. I think something else is that, like we said, there are so many applicants who are like probably equally competent, but at the end of the day, they're also selecting someone who they would enjoy working with. So like even if you pass all like the technical aspects of the interview, if you're like a complete jerk that people don't want to work with, like they will choose someone else to extend an offer to. And part of it is like during that interview, you should, like Malin already said, like ask questions that show that you're like interested in the work, but also like you can ask more so about like the team's direction, that sort of thing, just to so that like it kind of shows that you're interested in like being part of that team's growth and like trajectory forwards.
Yeah, definitely. And then we just got a question. I mean, if you guys like have any questions, just like type it in the chat as we go along. But one question that was sent to me was, besides like looking at the website and doing like basic level research, what do you guys suggest when it comes to like doing deep research into a company? What does that actually entail? And like something along like I guess like the question that is asking, when you talk about doing research for a company, what does that really entail? How deep you should go, and what should you prepare ahead of time?
I think it comes down to the scale of the company you're looking at. I think at the very base level, like know what your job entails to the best of your knowledge. Like everybody says they want to go into banking or consulting after college, but what does that actually mean? What do they do on the job? What like just as like as a profession, what does that profession truly like mean and do, and like what is their value prop in society? And then I think taking it a layer deeper, there is if there's a specific team that you're trying to join in that realm, like how do you get connected with that team, right? This could be reaching out on LinkedIn. This could be looking in your network if you have prior alumni that's been in that position or currently with that company and seeing if you could grab a coffee chat with them. And then in those like 15 to 30-minute coffee chats, truly trying to understand like what makes your culture or your company different from others. And I think that's when you really get the inside scoop that like a normal person just looking at a website won't be able to see. Like I think, oh sorry, I'm doing that one more
No,
thing.
no, go ahead. Yeah.
Like I would say something that like people have reached out to me to ask about AEA, and on the website all of our portfolio companies, you can see the type of industries we invest in, but when they call me trip, they get to hear about like what does office commodity looks like, what kind of things we do for happy hour, or what kind of like training and like recruiting things that we offer to our associates. And that's something that they can then bring in elements of into their interview because they get a better sense of like what kind of culture do they like. And then it goes back to response on like how do I sound like someone that they would want to work over.
Yeah, I can jump off from that. Like, in addition to alumni, I think your current, like the current upperclassmen are also like a super useful source where like if you're applying to a company and you know someone who is an intern there like last summer or something, they will definitely know like what how the internship is structured. You can ask about like return offers too. That's probably something you can't really find online. You can get the inside scoop about that. I think something else is like you can look in terms of like your clubs, like not necessarily even like pre-professional clubs, which obviously help where if you're like, for example, consulting club, business club, that sort of thing, there will obviously be a lot of people who have previously interned at firms that you're interested in. So they can definitely give you the inside scoop about things. But also like even if you're on, like a sports team or something, like most people, like a lot of people probably have some sort of like summer internship experience. So going through these like informal channels are definitely also ways to like um kind of like have not stiff like conversations about like the job search and also how the internship is like.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of going down the path of networking a bit more, in your personal opinions, what was like the single networking move, whether it be cold emails, coffee chats, that produced like the highest return for you when it comes to landing interviews? And how did you execute it? Specifically, like how did you structure your cold emails? How did you structure reaching out for coffee chats? And like what did you talk about during those coffee chats?
I would probably say reaching out to alumni for me worked the best. I think I don't know if this is Dartmouth specific, but Dartmouth does have a really strong alumni presence on Wall Street, and like alumni are always very happy to help. Um, so I think it's been a pretty like 1-to-1 hit ratio. Maybe like I don't know, like I think easily 8 out of 10 people that I reach out to that is Dartmouth graduate would typically respond to me. I think it's a pay it forward program because I do also respond current Dartmouth students who reach out to me, whether it's on email or LinkedIn, to talk about my career if they have questions. I would say on the flip side of that is like don't feel like bogged down if people don't respond to you. You could like just move on and continue to reach out to people because like people do hold really busy lives. So I don't think it's not something to take personally if they don't respond to you. It might not be a good time at that point in time because of how come back to you later on. But there's also like so many people in the industry that you could reach out to like, don't let like certain people that you like was hoping for a response to not getting back to you make you feel like
I think also like headhunters on LinkedIn are actually a pretty useful connection as well. The way I found my job at Millennium was actually like a headhunter reached out to me. So like that entails having your LinkedIn sort of like up to date in terms of your education, previous internship experiences to show that you have some sort of like relevancy towards like a specific area in finance. And then a headhunter would reach out to you and they're essentially like a larger entity that has like connections with a lot of different finance firms and they will know that like X company has an opening for like new grads, for example. I guess this applies more towards like new grads and like internships, but I think it's still sort of like a useful tidbit of information. But showing that like on LinkedIn, there's like a banner that shows open to work or something like that, and headhunters will reach out to you to see if you're interested or like looking for any jobs and they'll have an array of companies that will sort of like fit your needs and your interests and what you're looking towards in your career. And I think because they have a direct connection with that company and also their HR, typically you will be able to get past that first screen of like of the resume and also being able to like get through a screen with the HR. So that already kind of like elevates your chances a lot by not being tossed out in the initial stages of like a robot scanning your resume. But yeah, I guess this is more so on like the full-time side than like the internship side, but still useful nonetheless.
Definitely. And any specific advice on like how to structure reaching out to people when it comes to like cold emailing, coffee chat emails, like what to include in those specifically?
my recommendation is typically to keep it short and sweet. I think you kind of like give an intro of yourself, like I'm so and so, currently a junior at XYZ University, interested um going into this industry, came across your profile and found it to be really interesting. Would love to like throw 15 to 30 minutes to do a quick call or coffee chat if you have time. So learn more.
And
There's a
I
question.
think,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That was it.
Yeah, I think also like developing some sort of common ground. So like if you went to the same college, obviously like mentioned that. If you guys like I don't know, summer club or something along the lines of that, just trying to establish some sorts of like common ground instead of being like a complete stranger will probably increase like that person responding to your cold email or something like that.
Yep, agreed. But I would probably lean against I have received emails where it's like a whole letter and then like the resume attached, and that feels a little too.
Yeah.
And now I guess shifting a bit more away from like the networking aspect and more onto interviews. I think generally, how did you guys prepare for your interviews, whether that be behavioral and technical? Were there any resources that you thought like really helped you when it comes to preparing more of the technical portions? Yeah, and just like any like practical steps that you took along the way that you thought were helpful in the long run.
This
Uh,
question is probably industry specific, because each industry preps differently. I could at least speak thing. I would say case prepping is probably the most important thing, and I found it really helpful to case prep with friends, where you could have someone to like be the mock interviewer and prep you through the cases. I probably found the MBA you could easily find online as a free resource, or if you like ask any of your like upperclassmen or professional clubs on campus, they probably have a drive that has all the casebooks saved. And once you get access to the casebooks, kind of just going through them with friends. And then I think at a certain point when you've gone through enough, you can going through it yourself. What I found really helpful is to do the same case again, like a few weeks later, to see like I guess after the first time I do the case, I would evaluate like where I did well, where I didn't, and where I could have improved. And then a few weeks later, I would do the case again to see like which of the learning points that I actually pick up on, such that I remember to do this time to ensure that I've actually learned it and improved. It's just kind of like doing it once and like never seeing that case again. Because then I don't really know if I actually picked up where I could have done better.
yeah, I completely agree with that. I think I can speak more towards like the quant finance part of things, but a lot of the questions that are asked, they're going to be like mental math, probability, statistics, brain teasers. And depending on your role, if you're also looking in towards like quant research, there will be like some sort of like coding portion. Some of it might be like data science oriented, where it's like a take home portion. Others are like you'll be coding in front of like a full timer. And I would say one thing that I did while I was interviewing was that I kept a running doc or like Excel of like questions that I got asked. And obviously, if you like don't know the answer, that's like a great source of like being able to review things. And I think like once you interview with a lot of the firms, you'll be able to like recognize patterns of questions that they'll ask. And like next time you see it, if you've like documented it and like fully understand like how to answer a question, that will obviously help you in the long run. Um, in terms of like the data science part of things, I think like the thing that helped me most was doing research in college and doing it specifically with like some like finance projects. So, for example, I'll be a little bit more specific, but like being able to like, use pandas or like SAS models, like doing those like linear regressions, that sort of thing, that will come up if you're doing some sort of like take home data science interview like case or like whatever. But having some familiarity with these tools will definitely help you when you're interviewing.
Yeah. Definitely great advice there. I know during interviews you're gonna be asked a set, like especially the first round, you're gonna be asked a bunch of like those questions you know you should expect. Tell me about yourself, why us, biggest strength, biggest weakness. Tell us about a time like you went through a challenge. Do you have any advice on answering those questions?
I think one thing to know is sort of like understand what the company values are. So you could probably just go on their website and they'll say that we value, I don't know, like hunger for knowledge. I'm blinking out, but like the generic type of values. And if you're able to incorporate like different stories or like ways to show that you're like embodying these values, that's definitely a pro there. And I think this is also an area to demonstrate that you've done your research about the company. So if you're able to extend it towards something that the company values, like, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything Angelina said. I think the way I went about it is I usually had 5 to 6 stories that I prepped. I like actually wrote out the stories. Um, and they wouldn't be the answer to any specific questions, but there would be stories that, truly happened to me that I feel like could be molded to different questions, whether it's, talking about a time you faced challenging situation where you had to solve a problem, where you had to show leadership. Like more or less, you could use like the same set of 5 to 6 stories, I would say, to answer these questions. It's just that depending on what the question being asked is, that's the point of the story that you put the emphasis on, and you're able to like prepare for that. I think personally that made it a lot easier for me than to try to like figure out behavioral question that was out there possible. I also interviewed for Amazon because I was doing my AWS internship, and I was like researching them, and they had a really nice technique that I thought was helpful that they called the STAR, which is situation, task, action, result. And like they literally tell you, oh, if you are interviewing for Amazon, you should follow this answering model to answer your question so we understand like what exactly was the situation you were facing, what task did you have at hand, what action did you take, and ultimately what kind of result did you achieve from resolving whatever problem you were in. And I think that's a pretty straightforward way or template you could at least use as a starting kind of frame your answers when you're putting stories.
Yeah. Definitely great advice there. And I think moving towards like the end of the interview, I think you're gonna always be asked, like, do you have any questions for us? Besides doing like research, like specific research for that company, what are some example questions that like you guys have asked that you think have really like helped tip the scale? And like how did you come up with those questions?
I don't think I don't think that question ever tips the scale in an interview process. I think it's good to have questions to show that you're genuinely interested, but it's never going to be like a break or make factor. I would say like this really comes down to like, are you genuinely interested in this industry or company, right? It could be like, oh, why did you choose to go into consulting? Why did you choose to PE? Like, why are you still here today? Like, if you were in my shoes, what would be if you were in my shoes, what would you have done differently? Like, offer me, like things like that. I think it's just trying to like engage in a genuine conversation with the person and try to connect with. I don't think anyone should overthink that question. It's really, I think it's out of formality for them to ask it, and I think good to have you genuinely have about the company or the industry that you would want, like almost consider it as a part of a coffee chat that you would like want to learn more about just because they've had more years or experience in the industry than you are, but I wouldn't like overthink like, oh, asking this question would make me stand out.
Yeah, I agree. I think something that I liked asking, more so out of like personal curiosity, is just like how the interviewer came to their current like role or like position today, and hear about their story. And I think it's just interesting to see how like people have diverse paths towards like the current position that you're trying to pursue. And it also gives a chance for the interviewer to like talk about themselves instead of like having everything revolve around you. And it's just like useful insights to I guess like establish a little bit more of a personal connection, even if you don't end up returning or like joining that firm. But just having like a new, I guess, like data point or like something for you um to consider.
Yeah. Definitely very valuable there. We have two more questions that are more tailored towards college students who are now looking for internships, and it's more co coming from the advice side. So for someone who, say, doesn't have um, a sophomore, junior, or even senior internship set in mind, um, and like now it's heading into summer, what do you like? What are your advice when it comes to like what they should do? Is there any like project you would like suggest they pick up to fill the gap that they have this summer? So like just any advice for anyone who might not have landed an internship for this summer.
I think schools are a good like first resource where I'm sure there will be a lot of professors who would be willing to take on students for different research programs, um, different research projects, sorry, and that can be more tailored towards like finance. So if you do have a business school, or like something that's more like technical, like statistical modeling, that could something that you can go towards. And then I guess the other thing that comes to mind is startups. Startups generally might not have like as structured of a interview timeline in terms of like you need to apply by like the winter of the previous year or something like that. And they will do things more on a rolling basis, or like positions will open up a little bit more last minute. And just being able to have some sort of like industry experience, even if it's like not directly like, for example, if you wanted to do consulting, it might not necessarily be something like directly related to that, but at least like showing that you did something during that summer and were able to contribute to a team in some capacity, that already is like a standout.
Yeah, I would second everything that Angelina said. I think we all go to like very good schools who, you know, tend to always have some founder several decades into their their career that is starting a new company and would love to have a young college intern working for them, even if it means that it's unpaid. I think it's good experience to have and a good mentor to have. These entrepreneurs tend to be people who have like been successful in their field and is now trying to do something on their own. And I think tapping into your own alumni network is always more powerful than you would think.
No. And kind of just building off of that, for students who like don't necessarily want to go into with like breaking into the big four or like any big firms. What are some hidden channels? I mean, we talked a bit about startups, but what are some other hidden channels, whether that be like boutique firms, search funds that are available for them to pursue? And how would they kind of go about finding these opportunities? Because I know it's one thing to say like startups are great, but how would you necessarily navigate like finding that startup, and how would you like recommend reaching out and stuff like that?
For me, at least for MIT, we had a website called Handshake. I don't know if all colleges have it, but maybe like a large number of them do. But essentially, they compile a lot of different opportunities. They could be things that we already mentioned, so like startups. There could be like research opportunities. There's also like, um, I forget the exact term for it, but it's like different. You can work with like a nonprofit, that also is something like tangentially related. So that's already like a good database that like constantly updates with like alumni maybe, or like just like local companies who are trying to recruit like an intern. And if you have like alerts set up, you can probably see like these new listings come out pretty easily.
Yeah, I would recommend the same. I think most schools usually have whether it's Handshake or something else that you can leverage. And then I think the advice that I would give is like for me, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something business related, but I didn't have it in mind. So it just made sense for me to go the generalist route. What I did dabble in was tech because I thought that was something that I may potentially be interested in. And I think for those who are looking for experiences, it'll be more important and relevant for them to self-reflect on like what are the industries that I'm specifically interested in, right? Like if it's tech, then maybe a TMT consulting firm. If it's I don't know, something that is like bio pre-med related, even though I'm no longer pursuing that track, I'm still interested in that field. And maybe I look for specific like healthcare investing boutiques or healthcare consulting boutiques, which there are many options of. I think it's just taking that extra time to reflect on
Mhm.
like are there specific industries that I'm more aligned to that I would be more interested to work for, and then doing research based off of those rather than trying to go for a generalist experience in one of the bigger firms.
I know there's one question already sent in on the form that I'll ask just to get things started. It is like, what is your advice on how to best differentiate yourself from others during an interview or an internship?
I think we sort of touched on the interview standout part, so maybe we can talk more about like during the internship itself. But obviously, like being able to do the work, but be able to do like beyond what was given to you. So, Part of this is like just even talking to full-timers to kind of like understand bigger picture what the project is, not necessarily just like understanding like the nitty-gritty details and just executing them, but understanding where this project is going to be integrated, if it is obviously into the bigger like grand scheme of things. And in that case, you can probably identify areas that you can expand on the existing sort of like project details. And I think the other part is asking questions. So showing that you're curious about the work that you're doing, and even like requesting feedback. Like some internships might not be as structured in terms of like having a halfway point, and then you'll meet with your manager who will say that you've been doing XYZ well, and then ABC like you need some improvement on. But if there isn't that structure provided, just like asking your mentor directly and saying like, hey, like what are some things that I can work on, that already shows that you're interested in like being better, and also like for yourself, but also like for the team.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think Angelina covered everything I had in mind. If I had to add anything, which kind of encompasses everything she said, is just coming in with a good attitude and being ready to learn. I don't think like I think the interview process is very competitive, but when you're actually on the job, um, personally, I feel like the expectations gets lowered just because they know that you're a college intern. They're not expecting you to know much, and a lot of it is like learning experience for you. So I think coming in with an attitude that you are there to learn and you're happy to take the time to understand things that you might not know right away, and like being willing to ask questions. I think people generally like do actually enjoy like mentoring younger folks because they've been in your shoes before. They probably like went through the same internship experience to get where they are, and are there happy to help, but they would want you take the initiative to reach out and ask those questions.
Yeah. Another question that was submitted by Andrew. So I'll ask the first one is, when you first started, how did you start to understand what your job entailed? Were you assigned a project by a supervisor, or did you like take initiatives in a different way?
That question feels quite company specific. I don't know if there's like a one answer fits all kind of task, but especially for people coming right out of college, I would say most companies or most large companies these days typically have a training program before to onboard everybody because everybody starts in cohorts. So in those like first to 2 weeks of onboarding would be where you are learning like what the job is, what are the key things, what are your key responsibilities, who you would be reporting to, and I think that's probably where you learn. I say that with the caveat that most of your learning happens on the job, especially in industries that we're talking about today. I would say your toughest learning curve is probably the first 6 months on the job, where like after onboarding, everything is like now like coming to you at once, and you're trying to understand. So I would say like when that happens, just take it one step at a time. Everybody went through your shoes, so they know like how much information you're trying to digest at that time, and as long as you take the time to learn and ask questions, kind of saying, I would probably say your first 6 months on the job, the expectations are higher, but people still like your experience is probably going to be pretty similar to your internship experience, in that you're still very much trying to understand the company and learning about what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think also because you're a new grad, or like just out of college or something, like there's no expectation that you're going to be there first day and you already know like how to start a project, or like where this project is going to be going. So a lot of it is just being super responsive to feedback. So if your manager or like someone who's more senior is saying that like maybe like think about taking this in another direction instead, being able to like quickly iterate on that, and like obviously showing that you're responsive and you're engaged and like asking questions already is showing enough initiative.
Yeah. Moving on to the next question, like what are some macro or micro trends that you specifically are focusing on that might provide great opportunities for investment returns over the next few years? I think more broadly, so like when you're looking at trends, what are you thinking of Like how do trends and like the news turn into like investment opportunities?
I feel like this is very industry specific, but I can talk more on like the natural gas side, for example. But there's like it's very boiled down to the very basics, but you're looking at like a supply and demand balance sheet where there's supply of natural gas and then demand, which is like, for example, electricity. There's going to be liquefied natural gas exports, industrial demand. So, for example, when the tariffs or news of the tariffs hit like start of the April, markets are freaking out on both obviously macro side, but also like natural gas side because I guess, like, for example, to be more specific, if a recession was going to occur, that means that obviously industrial demand is going to be going down. And in that case, natural gas prices are also going to plummet. So people were pricing that in the market. And then also, like, for example, oil prices are going to be correlated because, like, natural gas sometimes is a byproduct of oil drilling. So if oil prices are low enough where it doesn't make sense for our producers to produce more oil, that means that there will also be lower natural gas supplies. So that's like some like a little bit more detail in terms of like things that we're considering, but also like there will be iterative news that comes out like, hey, there's like a new tariff negotiation strike with another country or something like that. And slowly the market's going to be pricing in like what's the probability of the recession, that sort of thing. And from there, that might be an investment opportunity. But that's sort of very high level example.
Yeah, that's actually quite a tough question. I think it's very industry specific. I think probably not going into any industry, I would say there's some kind of like investment fundamentals that we'll always consider when we're looking at in my fund. To name some off the back, it's like, is this an industry a recession proof industry, right? Like, especially given trade war dynamics, tariff dynamics. If we were to head in a recession, how would this industry be impacted, and how would that impact the growth of this company? I think that's something that we'll always consider, and then determine depending on the type of investments you do. We our fund tends to have a greater focus on distribution, just because it is more light on capex, and the way that the model works. Want to maintain a good amount of free cash flow to make sure that your company can continue to operate and generate cash. So we tend to look for models that are like CapEx. And then I think from there, then it becomes like specific industry specific trends on like, where do you see this industry growing in 3 to 5 years? Do you see this business that doing something that's fundamentally different in the industry, or is this just a temporary fade that would go away? And how would that impact their margin? But that's like very high level. Obviously, industry to industry, there'll be different trends.
Right. And the next question I know you guys both kind of touched upon, so it's just a matter if you guys want to add onto your response is how do you learn the essential skills for the job you apply for, or is it mostly just learning on the job? Is there anything like you want to add on that end?
I would say most of it was learned on the job. Like there's no handbook or like textbook like in college where it tells you everything you have to learn. It's like also everything that you're learning is evolving. So there will be new information that pops up and you have to just like integrate that into like your current reasoning of things. I guess the only thing for me would be like coding wise, just having that sort of foundation and be able to like add to that toolbox when you're like doing modeling. That yeah.
Form. The question asked there is like, how did you guys balance all like applying for internships, but also like doing well in school? So it's like the balance between GPA and then like balance for like needing to recruit as well. Like, how did you manage that? Did you have a specific schedule?
I think, at least in memory, recruiting typically happened in a very specific semester.
Mhm.
For like, I would say like for Dartmouth, junior summer recruiting basically all happened during sophomore summer. But we also like we were in a unique system in Dartmouth where like all the sophomores would stay on campus during the summer, have a semester together. But I think to that point, we were definitely a lot of my friends and I were intentional in the classes that we selected for the semester or quarter that we knew was going to be an intense recruiting quarter. So I think if you know that you're going to be really busy with slightly easier classes that term so that you can balance and have more time to put into recruiting prep. And then after recruiting is done, you then like choose the classes that are like more difficult and you know will take more time. So it's kind of just prioritizing what you need at that.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think also finance recruiting starts pretty early. So it's typically like, well, I don't know, some of the recruiting times are getting kind of crazy where it's like more than 1 year in advance or something. But like, for example, I would just try to get my recruiting done before school started. So I just didn't have to worry about it at all by the time like school rolls around. But yeah.
Yeah. The next question on that end is like, what websites, training courses, modeling classes did you take that you found helpful? And what about AI tools that you also found useful?
Um, AI was unfortunately not around yet when I did recruiting. I didn't feel old until that question was asked. But I do use AI every day now at work. Um, I would probably think honestly, ChatGPT is a pretty good tool for you to come up with like behavioral question drafts if you're having a hard time trying to organize your thoughts, like just like what is the best way I can present this in a succinct way during an interview. They'll probably have a pretty good answer for you that you use as an initial draft to build off of. Other than that, I could at least speak to consulting, which I mentioned earlier in the conversation, relying on the MBA prep books. These books was really helpful for me, and then I didn't do that much prep going into PE, but Wall Street, I think Wall Street Prep is what it's called, or where they do a lot of good modeling classes that um, during our first 3 weeks on the job, they actually like hire the people to come in and teach us how to do it. So I think to that extent, if you want to put in the additional investment ahead of time to learn about modeling, you can do that. Although I would probably argue that it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have too much to add to that. I guess like just doing like more so on the statistical modeling side of things, like obviously take stats classes, no probability. And then also if you have the chance of doing like research, and being able to do like actual hands-on research, that itself will be like a huge boost.
Perfect. And with that, I think that's all the questions that were submitted. I want to turn it over to Maylin and Angelina if you guys have any like last words you want to say to everyone. Just as a closing statement, I guess.
Um, Best of luck. You guys do great, and I think it's a stressful period. I remember it being a stressful period, but at the end of the day, it's your first job out of college, and it's the start of a long, successful career you'll have. So don't overthink.
Yeah. Also, like, I do believe that things will turn out for like the best. So even if you really wanted like one job, like, and you don't end up getting it, there will be another opening for you, and it might be something that you end up being more interested in. So just trust the process.
Yes, and be open to options. Like even if you felt like you were not interested, if that's the choice that you ultimately like go for, like just enjoy the process and like genuinely take advantage of every opportunity out
But with that, thank you all for coming today.